Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The stars flickered overhead, each one a distant, burning promise in the cold expanse of the universe. Captain Jax Vorn stood at the bridge of the Adventurer, a sleek and formidable ship designed for long voyages across galaxies. The hum of the ship's engines was a steady comfort, a sound that had become a part of Jax's very being. His eyes scanned the holographic star charts in front of him, but his thoughts weren't on the endless reaches of space. They were on the signal that had been intercepted 3 days ago. The signal had come from a planet called Valtor, a world known for its strange, isolated inhabitants. It was an odd planet, untouched by any known intergalactic explorers for over 2 centuries. The signal was a cry for help, a distress message coded in an ancient, almost forgotten language, one that Jax had learned during his years of training. But what intrigued him most wasn't the message itself. It was the source. The transmission had been sent from a city located deep in the planet's southern hemisphere, a city long thought to be a myth, said to be inhabited only by an ancient race of beings known as the Valtorians. These beings were rumored to possess knowledge and technology far beyond the capabilities of any known species, including humans. And the message, the one that repeated over and over, resonated with an undeniable urgency. "I've been waiting for you, human." Jax leaned back in his chair, the weight of the moment sinking in. The bridge was quiet except for the soft murmur of the ship's systems. His crew, a mix of seasoned officers and young recruits, all kept their heads down, eyes on their tasks. They knew better than to interrupt him when he was deep in thought. He rubbed his hand across his chin, feeling the faint stubble before turning to his first officer, Lieutenant Isha Ray. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice low but commanding, "we're approaching the Valtorian system. Prepare for landing." "Aye, Captain," Isha responded, her face a mask of calm professionalism. "I've already begun the calculations. We'll be in orbit within the hour." Jax nodded, his mind racing. Valtor was no ordinary planet. If the signal was genuine, there was something on that world that had drawn the Valtorians to it. Or perhaps it was waiting for someone, waiting for him. The adventurer descended through the dense atmosphere of Valtor, the city of Saren looming below like a forgotten relic from a time long past. The city's architecture was a mix of alien elegance and decayed grandeur, with towering spires and intricate bridges stretching across a vast network of land and water. At first glance, it looked like a place out of legend, untouched by the passage of time. As the ship landed, the crew scrambled to prepare for the descent. Jax, as usual, was the first to step off the ship, his boots hitting the planet's surface with a soft thud. The air was thick and humid, the scent of ancient plants and unknown spices swirling around him. He adjusted his jacket and motioned for the others to follow. The planet's surface was eerily silent. No signs of life were visible at first, just the occasional flicker of light from distant towers. As they made their way toward the heart of the city, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that unseen eyes were upon them from every shadow. The silence was unsettling, too perfect in its stillness. Finally they reached the gates of Saren. Massive stone doors, covered in strange symbols, stood open as if welcoming them in. Jax motioned for the team to proceed, and they entered, weapons drawn but cautious. Inside, the city was a labyrinth of narrow streets and abandoned structures. The air was heavy with the weight of centuries, and yet there was something alive here. The faintest hum of energy thrummed in the walls, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. "Captain," Isha whispered, her voice barely audible. "This place, it's not like any civilization I've seen. It's ancient but it's still active." Jax's eyes narrowed as they walked deeper into the city. The buildings seemed to pulse with a strange energy as if they were waiting for something, or someone. He felt a chill run down his spine, not from the temperature, but from the feeling that they weren't alone. They turned a corner and there she stood. A woman. Tall and ethereal, with skin the color of moonlight and eyes that shimmered with a depth that Jax couldn't comprehend. She was dressed in flowing robes, the fabric shimmering like liquid metal, and her hair cascaded down her back in silver waves. She didn't move when they approached, but her eyes locked onto Jax's with an intensity that felt almost familiar. "I've been waiting for you for so long, human," she said, her voice a soft melody that seemed to echo in Jax's mind as much as in his ears. Her words carried an unspoken meaning, an ancient longing that seemed to resonate through the very air around them. Jax stopped dead in his tracks, heart pounding in his chest. The woman's gaze never wavered, and her lips curled into a subtle, knowing smile. He couldn't place it, but there was something about her, something that tugged at the deepest corners of his memory. Jax's voice faltered. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head as if savoring the moment. "I am Lyra, the last of the Voltorians. And I have been waiting for you, Captain Vorn." The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. She knew his name. She knew who he was. But how? And why? Before he could voice the thousand questions swirling in his mind, Lyra took a step forward, her presence overwhelming. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and Jax could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere. It was as if the very planet itself was holding its breath. "You are the one who will decide the fate of us all," she continued, her voice low and almost mournful. "And it is no coincidence that you are here." Jax felt a surge of confusion, his mind racing to make sense of what he was hearing. The last of the Voltorians? A being so ancient yet so powerful? And why was she speaking to him as if they had met before? "Why me?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "What does this have to do with me?" Lyra's eyes softened, and for a moment, Jax could have sworn she was looking at him with a mixture of pity and hope. "Because," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "you are the human I have been waiting for." And with that, the world around them seemed to shift, the silence broken by a distant, low rumble from deep within the city. "Come with me, Captain," Lyra said, turning toward the heart of Saren. "There is much you must understand before it is too late." And so, with no choice but to follow, Jax Vorn stepped deeper into the forgotten city of the Voltorians, unaware of the secrets that lay ahead. Jax's footsteps echoed in the empty streets of Saren as he followed Lyra, the last of the Voltorians. The silence that had once felt oppressive now seemed almost suffocating, as though the city itself was alive, watching them as they ventured deeper into its heart. The towering spires of stone and metal loomed overhead, their intricate designs both beautiful and unsettling, as if they were remnants of a civilization far more advanced than anything Jax had ever encountered. Despite the overwhelming sense of mystery surrounding her, Lyra moved with an eerie confidence, as though she belonged to this place, as though it had been waiting for her return for eons. Her silver hair swayed with each step, her glowing eyes never leaving Jax's face. The way she moved was almost otherworldly, her presence both calming and unnerving. Jax's mind raced with questions, but he dared not speak. There was something in her gaze that demanded patience, as though she would reveal the answers in her own time, when the moment was right. He could feel it. There was a weight to this encounter, a sense that the fate of the universe, or perhaps something far more personal, hinged on the conversation that would soon unfold. They reached the center of Saren, where the city's grandest structure stood. It was a massive pyramid, its base wide and sprawling, and its apex lost in the swirling clouds above. The architecture was unlike anything Jax had ever seen. Smooth, gleaming surfaces that seemed to pulse with energy, emitting a soft, harmonic hum that resonated through his bones. The structure appeared ancient, yet it exuded a sense of power and vitality, as though it were still very much alive. "This is where it begins," Lyra said, her voice quiet, reverberating in the hollow silence of the city. She gestured toward the massive entrance of the pyramid, where an enormous door, adorned with glowing symbols, awaited them. The symbols were shifting, changing as though they were alive. Jax couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he studied them. There was something primal, almost familiar about the patterns, though he couldn't place it. Without another word, Lyra approached the door, and with a subtle motion of her hand, the symbols shifted again. The massive door groaned and slowly began to open, revealing an expansive chamber bathed in a soft, ethereal light. Jax hesitated for a moment before following her inside. The air within was cool, and the light had an almost palpable quality to it, as if it were alive. The walls of the chamber were lined with ancient tapestries and sculptures, all depicting scenes of celestial battles, enigmatic beings, and symbols that spoke of knowledge beyond comprehension. At the far end of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it rested a large, crystalline object that seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. Lyra walked toward the pedestal, her footsteps graceful and deliberate. She placed her hand upon the crystal, and the entire chamber seemed to come alive, as if it were waking from a long slumber. The walls vibrated with an almost imperceptible hum, and the crystal's glow intensified, bathing them both in its light. "You feel it, don't you?" Lyra asked, her voice soft but charged with an unspoken meaning. "This is the heart of Saren. The source of the Valtorian power, the wellspring of our knowledge. It is here that all our secrets lie, waiting to be unlocked." Jax stepped forward, his eyes transfixed by the crystal. The energy emanating from it was palpable, and he could feel it tugging at him as if it were calling to him, urging him to come closer. He reached out a hand, but as his fingers neared the surface of the crystal, a surge of energy coursed through him, stopping him in his tracks. The sensation was overwhelming, sharp, hot, and electric. He recoiled instinctively, but the energy had already left its mark, and for a moment, the world around him seemed to blur. "Captain," Lyra's voice pierced through the fog in his mind. "You are connected now. You have touched the heart, and it has chosen you." Jax's breath came in short, ragged gasps as the world slowly came back into focus. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming surge of power that had coursed through him. He could still feel the echoes of it within him, a hum that reverberated deep within his bones. "What was that?" Jax asked, his voice hoarse. "What did I just feel?" "The heart is more than a source of power," Lyra explained, her gaze fixed on him with a knowing intensity. "It is a conduit. It connects all Volturians, all our memories, all our knowledge. And now, Captain, it has connected with you." Jax frowned, still processing the weight of her words. "But why? Why me?" Lyra stepped closer, her expression solemn. "You are the key to our survival. The Valtorian race has long known of a coming darkness, an ancient enemy that lies dormant in the far reaches of the galaxy. For centuries we have searched for the one who would awaken the heart, the one who could wield its power to defeat this enemy. And now that person is you." Jax felt a chill run down his spine as the implications of her words sank in. An ancient enemy? A darkness that threatened the galaxy? It sounded like something out of a myth, a story told to scare children. But the intensity in Lyra's eyes told him that she was not lying. She believed every word she said. "The darkness is not merely a force," Lyra continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It is a being, a creature of pure malice, and it has been waiting for eons to rise again. We, the Volturians, once fought this enemy, but we were not strong enough. We needed time to prepare, to find the one who could lead us. And now that time has come." Jax swallowed hard, his mind reeling. He had always known that space was vast, full of unimaginable wonders and dangers, but this was beyond anything he had ever anticipated. He had come to Valtor seeking answers, but now he found himself at the center of something far greater than himself, a battle that would shape the fate of entire worlds. "And what do you need me to do?" Jax asked, his voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty brewing within him. Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time, Jax saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "The heart has awakened, Captain, but it is not yet ready. You must train, learn its secrets, and unlock its power before the darkness rises. You are the last hope of the Volturians, and perhaps of every living being in this galaxy." Jax stood in silence, the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had never asked for this. He had never wanted to be a hero or a savior. But there was no denying the call, the undeniable pull of destiny. And so, as the hum of the heart reverberated through the chamber, Jax Vorn made a choice. He would embrace the path ahead, whatever it may bring. For the fate of the galaxy now rested in his hands. The days following Jax's initiation into the secrets of the heart were a blur of discovery, training, and uncertainty. He spent long hours in the vast, cavernous chambers of the pyramid, alongside Lyra and the ancient Valtorian relics that seemed to whisper their knowledge to him. The crystal was always there, pulsing with an almost hypnotic glow, as if it were alive with the wisdom of countless generations. Each time Jax touched it, the energy surged through him again, filling him with visions, flashes of memories not his own. Images of distant stars, celestial wars, and ancient civilizations long lost to the tides of time. But there was always something else, something deeper, gnawing at his mind. The price. The cost of wielding this power. It was as if the heart had unlocked something in him, an untapped well of potential, but each time he accessed it, a part of him felt like he was losing something. The very fabric of his being seemed to stretch and fray, and sometimes, when the visions were at their strongest, he would hear a voice, faint but unmistakable. "You are not ready, human. You cannot control it." The voice was a constant presence in the back of his mind, a warning that seemed to echo through the chamber, even when Lyra was not around. But whenever he tried to speak about it, to ask Lyra for answers, she would only offer a reassuring smile and a gentle touch. "You will learn," she would say. "In time all things will make sense. You are the one chosen by the heart. You will see." But the unease remained. It was on the 5th day after his initiation when the first sign of the enemy came. Jax was meditating in one of the pyramid's quiet, secluded chambers, his hands resting on his knees, his mind open to the flow of energy from the heart. He had grown accustomed to the strange sensations by now, the way his consciousness expanded beyond the confines of his body, the way he could feel the heartbeat of the planet beneath his feet, the way the stars themselves seemed to watch him. But this time was different. There was a crackling in the air, a sudden, sharp disturbance in the energy around him. It was subtle at first, like a ripple across the surface of a pond. But then it grew, a dark, pulsing force that cut through the stillness. Jax's eyes snapped open, his heart pounding in his chest. The chamber around him seemed to darken, the light of the heart dimming as though the source of power was suddenly being choked by something unseen. A cold dread settled in the pit of his stomach. "Lyra," he called out, but his voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the hall outside, and in an instant, Lyra was at his side, her face pale and drawn. "It's happening," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "The darkness is stirring. It knows you are here." Jax's mind raced as he stood up, his body moving almost on instinct. "What is it? What's happening?" Lyra turned her gaze toward the glowing crystal, her expression one of deep concern. "The heart's energy is being disturbed by an external force. It's the darkness. Something is awakening from the depths of the galaxy, and it's drawn to you, to the power you've unlocked." Jax felt a chill settle over him. The darkness. The ancient enemy Lyra had spoken of. But this was something far worse than he had anticipated. It wasn't just a distant, hypothetical threat. It was real. It was coming. "We need to act quickly," Lyra said, her tone unwavering. "The enemy has been dormant for eons, but it is awakening now. And it won't stop until it consumes everything in its path." "What do we do?" Jax asked, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Lyra's eyes locked with his, and for a moment, there was an almost unbearable weight in her gaze. She reached out and touched his arm, her fingers cool against his skin. "You need to embrace the heart fully, Captain. You must unlock its true power, or we will all be lost." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Unlock the heart's true power? Jax wasn't sure what that meant. He had already felt the power coursing through him, but each time he used it, there was that voice, warning him, questioning whether he was truly in control. But Lyra was right. There was no time to hesitate. "I'm ready," he said, his voice firm even though doubt lingered in the corners of his mind. Lyra nodded, and together they moved toward the central chamber, where the heart pulsed in its crystalline pedestal. The energy in the room seemed to thrum with anticipation, vibrating beneath Jax's feet. "You must surrender to the heart," Lyra instructed. "Let its power flow through you. Only then will you be able to control it. Only then will you be able to stand against the darkness." Jax approached the heart with a sense of grim determination. The moment his hand made contact with the crystal's smooth surface, the world around him seemed to explode. The chamber dissolved into a swirl of colors and lights, and Jax felt his mind stretch to its absolute limits. The visions flooded in again, images of battles, of death, of destruction. He saw entire worlds consumed by a dark, insatiable force. He saw himself standing at the center of a cosmic battlefield, wielding the heart's power as a weapon against the very entity that threatened to bring ruin to the galaxy. But with every vision there was the same voice. "You are not ready. You cannot control it." Jax's heart pounded in his chest as the energy surged through him. The power was intoxicating, overwhelming, and it threatened to consume him entirely. His muscles trembled with the effort of containing it, and he felt a sharp, biting pain in his skull as if his very mind were being torn apart. He fought against it, pushing back against the tide of energy, trying to assert control. "No," he shouted, gritting his teeth. "I will control it." In that moment, the heart seemed to pulse with an almost approving hum, and the flow of energy shifted. Jax's senses exploded in clarity. The vision stopped. The pain subsided. For the briefest of moments, he could feel the heart's power at his fingertips, like a fire coursing through his veins. It was his power. His to command. But there was something more. The darkness. He could feel it, lurking at the edges of his consciousness, aware of his every movement, waiting for the moment when he would falter, when he would lose control. Jax could sense it, like a shadow just beyond the reach of his vision, watching, waiting for his weakness. It was not enough just to unlock the heart's power. He had to master it. He had to conquer his fear, his doubt, and the overwhelming terror that threatened to undo him. He looked at Lyra, who stood watching him with a calm expression, as if she knew exactly what he was going through. "You have to do it, Jax," she said softly. "You have to make the choice. This power, this responsibility belongs to you now." And in that moment, Jax Vorn realized the truth. The heart was not just a source of power. It was a test. A test of will, of strength, of determination. And if he could not master it, then all would be lost. With a final, decisive breath, He closed his eyes and surrendered completely to the power of the heart. And in that instant everything changed. The world around Jack shattered. For an instant there was nothing, no shape, no form, no reality to grasp onto. He was floating in an endless, timeless void, suspended in a sea of pure energy. Every fiber of his being was stretched thin, as if the very essence of him had been peeled back to its core. And in the stillness he heard it, the pulse of the heart, echoing through the fabric of his consciousness. It resonated with the very rhythm of the universe, an ancient, eternal beat that seemed to synchronize with his heart. "You're the one." The voice came again, more forceful this time, like a whisper of thunder. It was neither male nor female, neither human nor alien. It was simply a presence, vast and unfathomable. And it was speaking directly to him, piercing through the chaos of his thoughts. "You have chosen human. You are ready." But Jax wasn't sure what he was ready for. The power surging through him was like a torrent of pure force, and he could feel it tugging at every part of him. His mind, his soul, his very sense of self. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and all-encompassing. His body trembled as he fought to maintain control, to assert his will over the overwhelming flow of energy. But something deep within him resisted. Something primal. He was human. The realization came to him in a flash. He wasn't meant to be a vessel for this power. He wasn't meant to be a god. He was a person, flawed, mortal, uncertain, and that was the key. The heart had chosen him not because of his strength or his destiny, but because he was the one who could navigate the balance. He was the one who could wield this power without being consumed by it. Jax clenched his fists, forcing the torrent of energy to slow. With each breath he grounded himself. He was a human. And no matter how vast this power was, no matter how ancient the forces surrounding him, he would control it. Not the other way around. The heart's pulse responded to his resolve. The blinding light that filled his senses began to ebb, and the world around him slowly reformed. The void began to dissipate, replaced by vivid images, visions, flashes of memory, so real that they seemed to carve themselves into his mind. He saw ancient wars. Celestial battles fought in the heart of stars. He saw the Volturians, their bodies glowing with light as they stood united, facing an enemy so vast and terrible that the very universe seemed to recoil from its presence. And in the center of it all there it was, the darkness. It was not a force, not a thing of simple malice or hate. No, it was a presence. A shape that defied description, an entity that existed outside of the very laws that govern life and death. A cosmic predator, feeding on the fabric of existence itself, consuming everything in its path. It was ancient, older than the stars themselves. And it had already destroyed countless civilizations. Jax could feel it now, the awareness of the darkness in his mind. It was coming. It was already here. A sudden jolt of pain snapped Jax from the visions. He gasped, his body shuddering as the power surged within him again. His eyes flew open to find himself standing in the central chamber, the heart pulsing in its pedestal, its energy no longer overwhelming but still present, alive, waiting for his next move. Lyra was beside him, her expression unreadable. She had been silent throughout the entire process, standing as though watching a storm unfold. But now she stepped forward, her voice a quiet whisper. "You've done it? You've claimed the power?" Jack swallowed, trying to steady his breath. The overwhelming sensation had not fully faded, but he was beginning to get a grip on it. "Is it enough? Can we stop it?" Lyra's gaze never left him. "You've unlocked the heart's true potential. But it's not just the heart's power that you must rely on now. The darkness is a force unlike any other. It will not fall easily. You will need more than just power to defeat it. You will need allies. You will need strategy. You will need time." The weight of her words sank deep within him. The enormity of what he had just taken on, what he had just awakened, was impossible to ignore. But there was one thing Lyra hadn't said. One thing that had been hanging in the air since the moment he'd touched the heart. The cost. "What is the price of this power?" Jax asked, his voice raw, filled with an urgency he could no longer conceal. Lyra's face darkened, her lips tightening into a thin line. "The heart does not give its power freely, Captain. It demands sacrifice." Jax frowned. "Sacrifice? What kind of sacrifice?" She did not answer him immediately. Instead, she reached out and touched the crystal, her fingers brushing lightly against its surface. The glow intensified, and in the sudden burst of light, Jax saw it. The vision again. The darkness. It was not simply a cosmic predator, not merely an enemy of the Volturians. No. The darkness had a mind, a will of its own. And it had seen them. It had already tasted the heart's awakening. It knows, Lyra murmured, her voice laced with despair. It has known for millennia. The darkness does not forget. Jax clenched his fists. Then we'll stop it. I'll stop it. But Lyra turned to him, her expression grave. The heart is not just a weapon. It is the last of its kind. It was created to defeat the darkness. But in doing so, it is bound to it. And when you wield the heart's power, you become tied to it as well. Jax's heart skipped a beat. Tied? You mean, I'm connected to it? Not just connected. Bound? Lyra's eyes held a depth of sorrow that Jax had never seen before. Every time you draw on the heart's energy, you draw closer to the darkness. It can feel you, feel the power flowing through you. It can reach into your mind. It can twist your thoughts, your will. And if you are not careful, if you cannot maintain control, it will consume you. It will make you one of its own. Jax felt his breath catch in his throat. The full weight of what he was facing pressed down on him, crushing him with its enormity. This wasn't just a war for the fate of the galaxy. This was a war for his very soul. Is there no way to break the bond? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Lyra shook her head. The bond is unbreakable. You are the last hope, Jax. But in the end it may cost you everything. The room grew still, and for a long moment Jax simply stood there, staring at the heart. The weight of the future hung in the balance, and he knew that whatever decision he made from this point on, there would be no turning back. Finally he spoke, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. I'll do it. I'll fight. Whatever the cost. Lyra's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment she looked at him with something akin to admiration, or perhaps pity. You may be the only one who can, Captain. But remember this, power always comes with a price. The darkness will come for you, and you must be ready. With those words, Lyra turned and began to walk toward the door of the chamber. Jax stood frozen, his mind racing, the weight of his newfound responsibility pressing down on him like a heavy mantle. In that moment he understood the true meaning of the heart's power. It wasn't about victory or conquest. It was about survival. And it was up to him to hold the line. To protect the galaxy. To stop the darkness before it consumed everything. And before it consumed him. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and followed Lyra out into the unknown. The battle had just begun. The weeks that followed Jax's awakening to the heart's true power passed in a blur of preparation. The urgency of their situation weighed heavily on the small group of survivors that had gathered on the Valtorian homeworld. There was no time for rest, no time for hesitation. The darkness was coming. Lyra had made it clear. They needed allies, powerful, trustworthy beings from across the galaxy who could help them face this unspeakable threat. Jax had thought that after claiming the heart's power, he would feel stronger, invincible even. But instead there was only a gnawing sense of foreboding. The more he used the heart, the more connected he became to the vast web of energy that pulsed beneath the surface of the galaxy. And each time he drew on its power, there was a little more of him that slipped away, his humanity chipped away by the dark, hungry force that sought to consume him. Lyra, ever watchful, had warned him of the dangers, of the toll the heart would take. The darkness, she had said, is not just an enemy of the Valtorians. It is a force that knows no borders. It will stop at nothing to wipe out every trace of light, every glimmer of hope. Jax couldn't afford to think about the cost right now. He had to focus on what came next. Gathering allies. Preparing for the fight ahead. The galaxy would have to unite or it would fall. It was early one morning when they received the first response from the galaxy's scattered factions. Jax stood before a massive holographic map of the galaxy, the blue and red lights flickering with activity as ships and coordinates appeared, each symbol marking the location of an ally or a potential recruit. Lyra was at his side, her expression one of quiet determination as she watched the displays shift. The Valtorians are ready, she said, her voice steady. But they will not be enough. We need the others. Jax nodded, his gaze fixed on the map. There was still so much to do. Every race, every civilization had to be called upon. The stakes were too high to allow pride or prejudice to stand in the way. The first faction to respond was the Tvari, a race of formidable warriors from the distant planet of Vorith. Their culture was one of strict honor and discipline, and they were known for their indomitable will in battle. Jax had heard stories of their skill with weapons, of their unmatched combat prowess. But there was one thing that set the Tvari apart from the rest of the galaxy: their absolute refusal to engage in a war unless the cause was one of pure justice. Jax's message was simple and direct. The darkness is a threat to all life. We fight or we die. The Tvari replied almost immediately, confirming their alliance. They would come to Valtor, but only on the condition that they would not be led into battle without proof of the cause. The Tvari were no fools. They would demand to see the heart, to understand the power that would be wielded against the darkness. Jax knew the importance of this. He had never been one for speeches or grand promises. The heart's power had to speak for itself. Lyra looked at him, her brow furrowed. Are you sure, Jax? Showing them the heart may bind them to our cause, but it also exposes us further. The darkness can feel the heart. It will know we are gathering forces. I don't have a choice, Jax said. We can't fight the darkness alone. Not with just the Voltorians. And if we don't show the Tvari, they won't come. They won't understand the urgency. Lyra's eyes flickered toward the map, her mind clearly racing. Then we'll have to move quickly. We need to make sure that the heart stays safe. And we need to prepare for the worst. The moment of silence that passed between them spoke volumes. There was no easy path forward. The stakes were far too high. The second response came from the Fenari, a nomadic people known for their vast fleets and formidable intelligence networks. Their ships were the fastest in the galaxy, able to slip in and out of spacetime with a precision that rivaled even the most advanced Valtorian technology. Jax had heard rumors that the Fenari had once been allies of the darkness, but had broken away millennia ago, fearing its destructive potential. Jax wasn't sure how true the rumors were, but he knew they were too valuable an ally to ignore. The Fenari offered their assistance, though they would only come on one condition. They wanted access to the heart's energy. Not to use it but to study it. The Fenari believed that if they could understand the nature of the heart, they could find a way to disrupt the darkness's power. It was a tempting offer, but Jax hesitated. The heart's power was unpredictable. It was ancient, unfathomable, and dangerous. Could he afford to let the Fenari tamper with it? He turned to Lyra, who had been silent for a long moment. Do we let them study it? He asked, his voice tense. Lyra's lips pressed together. The Fenari are known for their curiosity. If they believe they can unravel the heart's mysteries, they will stop at nothing to do so. But their fleet is unmatched. If they join us, we will have a better chance of standing against the darkness. But at what cost? Jax asked. We can't afford to lose control of the heart, Lyra. We can't risk that. I know, she replied softly. But we don't have many options. We either let them study it or we risk them turning away entirely. We need their fleet. Jax exhaled slowly, his mind racing. Then we make sure they understand the stakes. They can study the heart, but only under strict supervision. We don't let them experiment with its energy. We protect it at all costs. Lyra nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. Agreed. By the end of the week, Jax had sent out a dozen more requests for aid. Some of them answered with quick, confident responses, others with more caution. Every faction had its own terms, its own demands, but they all recognized the same truth. The darkness was coming. And if they didn't unite, they would all be swept away by it. But even as Jax moved forward with his plans, there was something that gnawed at him. The more he used the heart's power, the more he could feel it, like a shadow at the edge of his consciousness, an ancient presence watching him. It was subtle, like the whisper of wind in the dark, but it was always there. The darkness was aware of his every move. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on to himself. Every time he called upon the heart's power, a part of him felt like it slipped away. The voice inside his mind, the voice of the heart, became louder. More insistent. You're not ready, Jax. You cannot control it. Jax clenched his fists, pushing back the rising tide of doubt. He would not succumb. Not yet. He had a galaxy to save. The next morning, a new message arrived. This time, from the elusive Zikari, a race of enigmatic beings who existed at the very fringes of known space. Their ships were rumored to be capable of bending the laws of time itself, and their leaders were said to possess knowledge of ancient, forbidden technologies. Jax stared at the message, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. The Zikari had made their decision. They would come. And they would bring with them an ancient artifact that could change the course of the war. Jax took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. The pieces were falling into place. But at what cost? The storm was gathering. And soon the galaxy would be forced to choose a side. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Jax had spent every waking hour preparing for the arrival of their new allies, coordinating with the Voltorians, the Tvari, and the Fenari. Their ships would arrive within the week, and with them the chance to mount a real defense against the darkness. But despite the flurry of activity, Jax couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The more the alliances grew, the heavier the weight of responsibility on his shoulders became. The power of the heart was now more a curse than a blessing. The Zikari's arrival was imminent, and they had promised to bring with them an artifact that could tip the scales of the war. Jax wasn't sure what to expect, whether it was a weapon, a tool of knowledge, or something entirely different. But the rumors surrounding the Zikari were shrouded in secrecy. They had a reputation for never offering anything without a price. Still, there was little choice. The darkness was out there and time was running out. Lyra approached Jax one evening as he stood in the observation deck of the Valtorian citadel, gazing out at the endless expanse of stars. The view was breathtaking. An entire galaxy sprawled out before him, each star a potential beacon of hope. Or a potential graveyard. "You're thinking too much," Lyra said softly, standing beside him. Jax sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Can't afford not to think. We're building an army. We're assembling the best of the best, but the cost. I don't know if I can keep it all together. I'm not sure I can keep myself together." Lyra's gaze softened. "I know it's hard. But you're not alone. You've got us. And that's more than most ever have." Jax glanced at her, her presence comforting in a way that didn't ease the pressure in his chest, but at least distracted him from it. "I just hope it's enough," he muttered. "The darkness isn't a normal enemy. It's something different. Something ancient." Lyra stepped closer, her voice growing more serious. "You've seen its power. It's a predator, Jax. It hunts the light. It feeds on civilizations. But it has one weakness." Jax turned to face her. "What's that?" "The heart," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "It can't exist without a counterpart. The darkness may be ancient, but it has never had to face the full potential of the heart. You're the key. You and the heart together. That's what will stop it." Jax swallowed hard. The weight of Lyra's words hit him with a sudden force. He was the key. The heart had chosen him. And now the fate of the galaxy rested in his hands. He didn't know if he was ready for that. The Zikari fleet arrived on schedule, their ships entering Valtorian space with a surreal precision. They were unlike anything Jax had ever seen, sleek, obsidian vessels that seemed to distort the fabric of space itself, rippling as though they existed partially outside the flow of time. Their arrival was announced with a cryptic transmission from the Zikari leader, a being named Siren. The message was brief. "We bring the artifact. We bring the knowledge. We bring the end of the darkness. But beware, human. What we offer is not without sacrifice." Jax couldn't deny that the tone of Siren's message sent a chill down his spine. The Zikari had never been forthcoming about their motives, and now they were entering the heart of the battle with a warning. What had they brought? And what would it cost? The Zikari landed in the central square of the citadel, their ships folding in on themselves as they descended. The ground trembled slightly as their immense presence landed, and the air was filled with an eerie hum, an energy that seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. Jax and Lyra stood at the ready, flanked by their closest allies, as a figure emerged from the lead Zikari ship. Siren was tall, with an ethereal grace that made it hard to distinguish the being's features at first. For Siren was unmistakably female, though there was something ageless about her form, was dressed in a flowing cloak of liquid darkness, her skin shimmering with iridescent lights that shifted in color with every movement. Her eyes, however, were what stood out the most, glowing white, empty as though they could see beyond time itself. Siren's voice was smooth, and it echoed in the space around them, as though coming from all directions at once. "Human, you have come far. I see the heart pulses within you." Her gaze flicked to Jax, and for a moment he felt as though she were looking right through him, peeling back every layer of his mind. "We bring what you seek," Siren continued, "but know this, the darkness is not merely a force of nature. It is a sentience, a hunger that devours the very fabric of reality. It cannot be stopped by mere force. We have studied the heart for millennia and we know what must be done. You, Jax Alaric, are the key." Jax couldn't help but feel a twinge of fear. "And what's the price?" he asked, unable to hide the edge in his voice. Siren tilted her head slightly as if amused by the question. "The price is always the same," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is sacrifice. Your life, your soul. The power of the heart is not a gift. It is a bond, a covenant. The darkness will not relent until it claims what it desires. And once the heart has been used to fight it, the darkness will seek to possess it, to consume the one who wields it." Jax's stomach dropped. He had suspected as much, but hearing Siren say it so plainly made the reality even more terrifying. The heart had a price. And he, the one who had claimed its power, would be the one to pay it. "What is this artifact you bring?" Lyra asked, her voice steady but cautious. Siren motioned to the ship behind her, and a large, black crystalline object was lowered from the vessel. It shimmered with an unnatural energy, its surface rippling as if alive. It was shaped like a shard of jagged obsidian, but there was something deeply alien about it. It seemed to draw light into itself, absorbing the very air around it. "This," Siren said, "is the Nexus Shard. It is an ancient Zakari relic, a key to the fabric of reality. It can open rifts in space-time, allowing us to transport entire fleets instantly. But more importantly, it can disrupt the heart's connection to the darkness. If you are willing to use it." Jack stared at the shard, his mind racing. The Zakari had given them a powerful tool, but at what cost? The darkness wasn't something that could simply be disrupted or delayed. It was a presence that devoured, a void that swallowed everything in its path. No matter how powerful the Nexus Shard was, it seemed too small a thing to defeat such an enemy. He turned back to Siren, his voice firm. "How do we use it?" Siren's gaze softened ever so slightly. "The shard will allow you to create rifts, temporary portals through which we can strike directly at the heart of the darkness. But it is not without its own price. Every time you use it, the fabric of space itself is weakened. If you are not careful, the rift may remain open. And when that happens, the darkness can enter our world." Jack swallowed hard. The stakes had just been raised. They now had the power to strike back, but it came with consequences. The very fabric of reality was at risk. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes searching Siren's face. "And if we refuse?" Siren's smile was faint, yet knowing. "Then you will face the darkness unprepared. And you will fall." There was no choice. Jax took a deep breath and nodded. "We will use the shard. But we do it together. No one is left behind." Siren's smile deepened and she stepped aside, motioning for them to prepare. The battle had begun. The moment Jax took hold of the Nexus Shard, he felt an overwhelming surge of energy pulse through his body. It wasn't the power of the heart, nor was it the same cold alien hum of the darkness. This energy felt like the fabric of space itself, alive, stretching, bending. As though reality itself were a piece of cloth, and someone was pulling at its threads. He gripped the shard tighter, focusing on the task ahead. The Zakari had given him a tool, a weapon of sorts, but it was a weapon that came with grave consequences. He had no illusions that using it would be easy. Each use of the Nexus Shard could tear the very fabric of reality, opening the door for the darkness to enter their world. Jax had seen the consequences of such carelessness firsthand. Entire worlds had been lost because of rifts too wide, too unstable, too hasty. If he used the shard recklessly, it could mean the end of everything. "We're ready," Lyra's voice cut through his thoughts. Jax turned to see her standing next to him, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade, her eyes filled with resolve. Behind her, the Valtorian forces had gathered. The Tvari were there as well, their warriors prepared for battle, their battle axes gleaming under the pale light of Valtor's twin moons. The Fenari had arrived with their sleek, lightning-fast ships, their crews ready to fight for a cause greater than their own survival. And standing near the center, the Zakari had positioned themselves, their presence felt in the very air around them. Siren, their leader, was calm, but her eyes never left the Nexus Shard in Jax's hands. Jax's heart raced, but he kept his focus. "We strike now. Once the rift is open, we hit them hard. We don't have time to waste." Lyra nodded. "The darkness won't wait for us. It will come for us the moment we create the rift. You're sure you can control the shard?" "I can control it," Jax said, though doubt lingered in the back of his mind. He could feel the weight of the heart inside him, pressing at the edges of his thoughts. The darkness was out there waiting. And now, with the shard in his hand, Jax had to make a decision. To gamble with the fabric of reality itself or risk waiting too long to strike. "We'll be with you," Lyra said, her voice unwavering. Jax nodded and turned to the Nexus Shard. He felt the hum of the artifact deep in his chest, and for a moment, everything felt strangely still. A cold, crystalline silence filled the air, as though the universe itself had paused in anticipation. The shard pulsed in his hand, a steady beat that matched his own heart. He extended his other hand, and the shard began to glow with a deep, unsettling light. The space around him twisted. The ground beneath them quivered. Suddenly, with a violent crack, the air tore open, a rift forming before them, a jagged tear in the very fabric of space. Light bent and warped, and beyond the rift, Jack saw only darkness. Blackness. The swirling chaos that was the domain of the darkness. Jax's breath caught in his throat as he gazed into the void. The rift was stable, at least for now. The shard had done its job. The portal was open. Now, Jack said, his voice steely with determination. Now we strike. The Valtorian fleet moved into position first, their advanced ships ready to deploy their devastating firepower. Behind them, the Tvari warriors prepared their landing craft, their massive battle axes gleaming in the light of the rift. The Fenari ships, sleek and deadly, zipped through the air, their cloaking technology keeping them hidden from the view of any potential enemies. The Zikari, silent as always, had positioned themselves at the rear, their ships seemingly part of the darkness itself. Jax's eyes flickered to Siren, who had not moved from her place, her gaze fixed on the rift as though she were waiting for something. Waiting for him to give the order. Lyra stepped forward. You've opened the door. Now we need to push through before it closes? Jax nodded, taking one last deep breath before speaking into the comm. All units, prepare to engage. We go in together. We take the fight to the heart of the darkness. The fleet surged forward, crossing the threshold into the rift. Jax could feel the pressure build in his chest as the ships moved through the opening, leaving the familiar space behind them. The sense of unease grew as they traveled deeper into the void. It wasn't just the oppressive darkness, it was the sense that they were no longer fully within their universe, that the rules of reality no longer applied. The stars they had left behind seemed so far away, their light a faint glimmer in the distance. But in the rift there was no light, only an endless abyss. And then they saw it. A mass of swirling shadows, moving in unnatural patterns. The darkness itself, an entity of void and chaos, coalesced before them, an endless sea of tendrils, vast and unknowable, stretching across the rift. It was a storm of entropy, a force that sought to devour all that existed. Jax's blood ran cold. He had never fully understood the extent of the darkness before, but seeing it now in its true form, was like staring into the heart of the universe's despair. The darkness is alive, Lyra whispered, her voice laced with awe and terror. It's not just a force. It's conscious. The realization hit Jax like a hammer blow. The darkness was not merely an enemy to be defeated. It was a sentient, hungry presence, a being that existed to consume. And they were about to fight it in its domain. The fleet engaged immediately, weapons flaring to life as the ships began their assault. The Tvari warriors charged, roaring in defiance, their axes swinging through the air with deadly precision. The Fenari unleashed their deadly lightspeed strikes, hitting the tendrils of the darkness with pinpoint accuracy. But it was clear that no matter how many strikes they landed, the darkness did not falter. The shadows coiled and reformed, the void around them pulsating with malice. This isn't enough. Jax shouted, his voice filled with urgency. We need to strike at its core. At the heart of the darkness. Lyra's eyes met his. Where is it? Where is the heart? Jax looked around, feeling the pull of the darkness, its tendrils stretching toward them like claws reaching for prey. He could feel it now. The dark force was aware of them, aware of their presence. Was coming. And the rift, the tenuous bond between their world and the abyss, was beginning to close. We need to move fast, Jax said. I'll lead the charge. Follow me. He gripped the heart and the Nexus shard tightly, drawing on their combined power. The battle had only just begun and there was no turning back. The stakes had never been higher, and with the very fabric of space-time on the line, Jax knew that the true fight was only just beginning. Time itself had become the enemy, and they had to win or the galaxy would fall. With a final, resolute command, Jax led the charge into the heart of the darkness. The air in the rift was dense, suffocating. Every breath felt heavier than the last as Jax led his team through the abyss, each step carrying them deeper into the heart of the darkness. The rift behind them was beginning to shrink, a swirling anomaly that seemed to pulse with energy, as if trying to drag them back into its cold maw. It wasn't just a passage, it was a weapon, closing in, sealing off the last escape route. Lyra was beside him, her face a mask of determination. The Tvari warriors followed closely, their massive forms casting shadows across the eerie landscape. The Fenari ships were hovering above, launching precision strikes into the darkness, their sleek designs cutting through the swirling black mass like a knife through fog. But it wasn't enough. Their weapons, as powerful as they were, had little effect on the massive tendrils of shadow that coiled through the rift. The darkness wasn't a physical force. It was entropy itself, an all-consuming void that erased anything it touched. Jax felt a pang of dread in his chest, his mind heavy with the realization of the scale of what they were facing. They weren't fighting just an army. They were fighting an entire existence that devoured all light, all life, all meaning. It was a force that was as old as the stars, a hunger that had no end. Where is it? Jax asked, his voice grating as he scanned the dark horizon. "Where is the core?" Lyra glanced at him, her expression grim. "It's close. I can feel it. The heartbeat of the darkness." The rift around them pulsed in rhythm with a deep, unnatural thrum, a sound that reverberated through the bones, like the growl of an ancient beast waking from a deep slumber. They were close, dangerously close. The Zikari had warned him. They had told him the darkness was sentient. But no amount of preparation had prepared Jax for the sensation of it, the overwhelming weight of its consciousness pressing in on him from all sides. It wasn't just a presence. It was alive. A living entity that was aware of their every move, their every thought. And it was hungry. The darkness wasn't waiting for them to attack. It was waiting for them to make a mistake. "Look!" Lyra shouted, pointing toward the center of the rift. At first, Jax couldn't see anything but the black mass of swirling shadows. But then, as his eyes adjusted, he saw it, a vast, pulsing heart, beating like a star that had collapsed in on itself. It was a swirling vortex of darkness, a maelstrom of void that twisted and turned in on itself, as though it were alive, feeding on the energy around it. "That's it," Jax muttered, his voice tense. "The heart of the darkness." Lyra's grip tightened on her blade. "It doesn't look like anything we've fought before. We can't just shoot it down. We need to find its weakness." Jax nodded, his hand tightening around the Nexus shard. The shard had given them a means of striking back, but it had a price, a cost that Jax knew all too well. Every time they used it, the fabric of reality itself was torn, and the rift between their world and the darkness grew wider. With every strike, the risk of the darkness breaking through became more real. But this was the moment. If they didn't act now, they would lose everything. Jax's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden shriek, a sound so terrible that it seemed to come from the very air itself, from the depths of the rift. The darkness had noticed them. A wave of tendrils shot toward them, each one larger than the last, crashing against the fleet like a storm. Jax could hear the roar of the Valtorian ships as they unleashed their weapons, but it wasn't enough. The tendrils surged forward, wrapping around the ships, crushing them with terrifying speed. The fleet was being overwhelmed. Jax's heart raced. They had to end this now. The longer they waited, the greater the risk of the darkness spreading beyond the rift. "Move," he shouted. "To the core." With one swift motion, he charged toward the center of the rift, his boots thudding against the swirling darkness beneath him. Lyra was right behind him, her blade crackling with energy as she cut through the air, ready to strike. The Tvari warriors followed, their massive bodies charging ahead with the fury of battle in their eyes. But the darkness was quick to respond. The air around them shuddered as the tendrils lashed out, attacking from every angle. One of the Tvari warriors was struck, his massive form swept off his feet and swallowed by the void. Another warrior was struck by a wave of shadow and thrown into the rift, his scream cut short as he disappeared into the nothingness. "Stay focused," Lyra shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Keep moving." Jax felt the pull of the darkness at his back, a cold tug at his very soul. The heart was getting closer, and with every step the pressure increased. The closer they got to the core, the more intense the presence of the darkness became. It was a force that gnawed at his mind, a hunger that reached deep inside of him, whispering his deepest fears. It was trying to break him. But he would not break. The group reached the center of the rift, where the heart of the darkness pulsed before them, a swirling mass of shadow that seemed to absorb all light and life. The tendrils around them whipped in frenzy, but Jax held his ground. He could feel the heart in his chest now, the heart of the darkness and the heart of the light, two forces, locked in an eternal struggle. The rift was unstable, and every heartbeat from the core sent a tremor through space itself. The shard pulsed in his hand as if eager to fulfill its purpose. Jax turned to Lyra, his jaw set. "We need to strike it now. With everything we have." Lyra nodded, her eyes hard as steel. She took her position beside him, her blade raised. And then, in a single, unified movement, Jax raised the Nexus shard. He could feel its energy building inside of him, the weight of the sacrifice, the cost of using it. The heart of the darkness beat louder, each pulse making the air heavier, more suffocating. Jax focused, channeling all of his power into the shard. He had no choice but to push it to its limits. The shard began to crackle with energy, the fabric of space around them bending and warping as the rift grew larger, its edges shattering with brilliant, jagged light. "Now?" Jax shouted. With a burst of energy, the shard fired a beam of blinding light into the center of the core. The darkness screamed, a guttural wail that shook the very foundation of the rift. Tendrils lashed out in desperation, but it was too late. The shard's power tore into the heart of the darkness, unraveling its form, breaking its hold on the rift. The heart of the darkness shrieked, its form disintegrating into nothingness as the rift began to collapse, the tension in the air snapping like a taut wire. The pulse of the void slowed, and for the first time since they had entered, the rift began to close. But at a cost. Jax could feel it. The rift had been sealed, the darkness had been pushed back, but at the cost of the shard's energy, at the cost of the fabric of reality itself. "Get out!" Lyra shouted. "The rift is closing." Jax's world shifted violently. The darkness was retreating, but so was everything else. The rift was closing, and they had to escape before it was too late. With no time to lose, Jax turned and ran, Lyra close behind. The shard's light flickered, its power depleted, and the fabric of space around them began to collapse in on itself. The rift shrank to a pinpoint, and Jax knew they had mere moments to escape. He took one last glance at the heart of the darkness as it crumbled into nothingness. And then, with all his strength, he surged forward. The rift closed behind them. But the war was far from over. Jax's pulse hammered in his chest, the last echo of the Nexus shard's energy still vibrating through his body. The rift had sealed behind them, leaving only the remains of the darkness, an absence that seemed to stretch across the cosmos. The oppressive weight that had hung in the air for so long was now gone, but it was replaced with a profound silence, the kind that only follows a battle of such monumental scale. It was the kind of silence that made one question whether the world would ever feel whole again. He barely registered the movement beside him before Lyra's hand was on his shoulder, steadying him. He blinked rapidly, trying to shake off the dizziness that had settled in his mind after the rift had collapsed. The darkness, no, the entirety of the darkness, was gone, but at what cost? "We made it out," Lyra said softly, her voice strained but still filled with relief. "You did it, Jax." Jax nodded absently, his eyes drifting to the sky above them. They were back on Valtor now, standing amidst the ruins of their victory. The ships that had once hovered above, launching their assault into the heart of the darkness, now circled overhead, returning to their hangars in silence. The battlefield was eerily quiet, the hum of machinery and the crackle of static the only sound. But it wasn't the silence that unsettled Jax. It was the absence of the heart. The heart of the darkness, the core that had powered the rift, was no more. It had been consumed by the shard's power, fractured into a million pieces, its influence severed from the universe. And yet, despite the victory, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that something had been lost. The darkness had been driven back, but there was a hollowness that remained. He turned to Lyra, his voice low. "We won, but the cost. I don't know if we can ever truly recover from this." She didn't answer at first, her gaze distant. It was clear that she, too, understood the weight of what they had done. The rift they had opened had not only torn space, it had torn their lives, their galaxy, and perhaps even the fabric of their very existence. They had pushed the darkness back, but the scars of what they had unleashed would remain. The Nexus shard was no longer glowing, its energy expended in the final strike. The device, once a symbol of hope and power, now sat inert in Jax's hand, a silent reminder of how thin the line between salvation and destruction could be. He had wielded it in the hopes of saving everything, but in the process he had altered reality in ways he could hardly understand. "We have to rebuild," Lyra said finally, her voice steadying with resolve. "We may not know the full extent of the cost, but we can't let it be for nothing. We fought to protect what we have. And now we rebuild it." Jax's eyes flickered over the wreckage of the battlefield. The Voltorians, the Tvari, and the Fenari, all of them had lost something in this battle. And though they were standing in victory now, there was no denying the scars that would remain, both seen and unseen. But Lyra was right. They couldn't afford to dwell on the past forever. The darkness had been driven back, but the battle was far from over. There were other forces out there, forces they hadn't even begun to comprehend, that would eventually notice the rift they'd left behind. "Rebuild?" Jax muttered, his voice distant. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, but the task of rebuilding their shattered world was now his responsibility. Not just as a leader but as someone who had seen the true price of power. And yet, a part of him still felt something more pressing, something far darker than the rift. He had watched as the darkness had crumbled, but there was a question in his mind that refused to fade. If the darkness had been alive, if it had a will of its own, what else was out there? What other forces, hidden in the folds of space, had seen the Nexus shard's power and were now wondering if it could be theirs? It wasn't over. Not really. Lyra seemed to sense his unease. She stepped closer, her hand finding his once more. "I know what you're thinking," she said. But you're not alone in this. Whatever comes next, we face it together. All of us. Jax exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. They had always been stronger together, and in this universe where darkness was waiting around every corner, they needed each other more than ever. I don't know what's next, Jax confessed, but I do know this. I won't let anyone else suffer like we've suffered. No one else should have to bear the cost of the darkness. The ground rumbled beneath their feet, and Jax's heart skipped a beat. It was subtle at first, like the aftershock of a distant quake. But it didn't stop. Lyra's hand tightened on his arm. Jax, what's... Before she could finish her sentence, the sky above them cracked open with a roar. The air around them shimmered, and Jax felt a cold, biting gust of wind sweep across the battlefield. Something was breaking through. The ships that had returned to the skies above them suddenly veered off course, their sensors flaring with alarm. Faint screams rose from the distance as forces scrambled to defend themselves. Not again, Jax whispered under his breath. But it was too late. From the sky, a massive vessel descended, so large it blotted out the stars. It was a warship like nothing Jax had ever seen, its hull gleaming with an unnatural light, dark as obsidian but pulsating with an eerie, internal glow. The edges of the ship rippled with energy, distorting the very fabric of space around it as it broke through the atmosphere. A deep, unsettling hum filled the air, and Jax could hear the unmistakable sound of the darkness's heartbeat reverberating through the ground. It was back. No. Worse, it was evolving. The ship's descent slowed as it touched down on the shattered battlefield, its massive form dwarfing everything around it. A soft, chilling voice echoed through the air, an unearthly sound that sent a shiver down Jax's spine. We've been waiting for you, human. Jax's hand instinctively went to his side, where his blaster hung at his waist, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. The force that had come was far beyond anything they had ever faced. The darkness had learned. It had found a new way to strike. And now, Jax realized with horrifying clarity, the war was only just beginning. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.